Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, calm and serene music YouTuber because it's late at night because I just spent 9 hours watching a Let's Play of a Total War mod, something I've been obsessed with for years at this point. But, you know, it's November and the weather's just cooling down. I got my beanie on because it's just so cold. The riffs are just so cold I can't even handle it. Because you know what? We're talking about more black metal. We're talking about more cold, really chilling, disgusting, fantastic music, which is exactly what I like to talk about. This is like my favorite thing to do on this channel, even though it's really silly. I always look forward to it. And today we got another 15 great albums for you guys, and we're gonna continue what we were doing last time, as we did last year and as we did the year before. So at first we got Paysage d'Hiver's Nacht. That is the next Paysage d'Hiver demo album we're talking about here, and this one is interesting because it's a concept about night. It's sort of a sequel of sorts to Winterkalt, where it feels very conceptually sound. It's one of the longer Paysage d'Hiver albums, being about an hour and 11 minutes, and it is the worst Paysage d'Hiver album to date. You'd think with such a cool, dark concept that it would be the most conceptually sound, the most ambitious, but it's really not. It actually takes the least amount of risks of any Paysage d'Hiver album. That being said, it is still a Paysage d'Hiver album before the new age of Paysage d'Hiver, so it's all very similar to the other ones. It's just that of the 4 tracks, which yes, there are only 4 tracks to this hour and 11-minute long album, the second one is just kind of weak. It feels kind of uninspired. It's another black metal track, but it doesn't feel any more special than anything off of like Winterkalt per se. But I think everything off Winterkalt is actually a good amount better. What I do like though is the third track is sort of this black ambient instrumental track, which I think is one of the more ambitious Paysage d'Hiver tracks. But other than the third and fourth track having really cool ambient portions dipped in it, and the first track being just naturally on the ambient side, the second track is just maybe the weakest Paysage d'Hiver track to date, and it bogs the album down so much from being just too slow. It just doesn't pick up the pace. The riffing is really not that special. It just feels kind of weak. And unfortunately, that one track is so much of this album that it really bogs it down that much. So I think this album is just kind of good, but that's because it's Paysage d'Hiver. Paysage d'Hiver is just so that insane that they're allowed to mess up every once in a while and still be listenable. I just kind of expected more from the most different looking Paysage d'Hiver demo, from a glimpse at least, but I'm replacing this one with another dark, sort of black and ambient doom album here, with a band called Death Void Terror, with To the Great Monolith, specifically To the Great Monolith 2 here. And what I like about this one is that, like Paysage d'Hiver, it's from Switzerland. Like Paysage d'Hiver, it's black metal. Like Paysage d'Hiver, it's covered in ambient and doom textures, and it is one of the filthiest black metal albums I've ever heard. Not as much like Impaled Nazarene, a bit more like funeral doom or like some kind of sludge metal. It's genuinely a very upsetting piece of music. I'm not joking when I say that it actually made me feel like kind of sick. Like, it's literally conveys a similar warped feeling of being blackout drunk and being keeled over a toilet with nobody around. I talked to the guys on my Discord server about this, and they were in pretty much agreement with me. It is very underrated here. So if you guys want a Swiss black metal mixed with ambient and doom metal album, skip Nacht by Paysage d'Hiver and instead go with Death Void Terror, which is very underrated, honestly. And we're on to some more black doom here with a band called Amestigon with an album called Thier. This is a band from Austria, so a scene with not an entirely huge black metal scene that is discussed. There's really just Abigor and Summoning off the top of my head, but those are some banger bands, so I thought, maybe this one would be cool. And it's certainly interesting, sort of similar on the veins of some other albums we've been listening to here, such as, similar to something like Godblood, it's kind of got the Catatonia vibes a little bit, and as well as plenty of later albums I'll be talking about, even today, the Catatonia vibes run really deep. And what I mean by that is it's just a whole lot of weird stuff goes on, not really in an avant-garde direction or an ambient direction. It's just a whole lot of different styles put in here, but the difference is those other albums really make it work. Amestigon kind of flounders a bit. It just kind of feels meaningless in all honesty. And the biggest problem about this whole release is that the production is just so lacking. I feel totally uninspired. Now you can get like a Les Legions Noir release where you could have something so weird, like those weird off demos that are just post rock with a black metal like aesthetic, and it's so raw and so bizarre. That's a kind of weird that works. But having something this ambitious yet this overproduced feels really not ambitious at all. And you could tell by the random wandering riffs and how they just don't really go anywhere that it's also lacking in the ambition that it claims to have with the large track lengths, the giant album length, the minimalist album cover that's kind of pretentious if you think about it. There are a ton of synths, which is one sort of textural element that is kind of interesting, but they're not very well done synths. At a glimpse at this thing, you can look at the track lengths and you probably assume it's really drony and like a brick wall of sound, maybe a bit of industrial with how minimalist this album cover looks, bringing back ideas of like Have a Hedge or something. But in all actuality, it's this winding, progressive thing that ends up leading you nowhere in particular. The 20-minute title track is just too much. I really don't need something that brazenly long. There are mixed clean and yelled vocals, which is kind of interesting, but I think I've given my case as to why I don't love this album. I think it's okay. There are some important parts about it, but it would be better if it was half as long, more roughed up production, and better riffs, which is kind of everything that really matters in black metal. But if you want something that's kind of similar, with a similar Catatonia influence vibe that just is so weird, here's one that's a lot more feeling like atmospheric sludge metal. It very much has a direction, but it's really weird. And this is a band called Non-Existence with their album Antarctica. It is mixed basically 1-to-1 with death doom metal, and the mix is pretty awesome. I think I prefer the black metal riffs a lot, but the death doom style is the production is really supporting it a lot. And in all honesty, it's got kind of a poppy flair to the whole thing. Like, it's very clearly structured. Like, even though it'll be a 3-minute long verse section and then a 30-second hook, you'll hear it repeat, and you can track it really well even on first listen, which honestly, even though I didn't hear of this album until a couple weeks ago, I think it's an amazing beginner black metal album, kind of like Rotting Christ's debut. Speaking of Rotting Christ, I'll just start talking about that right now. I don't have a Rotting Christ album on this chart, as I mentioned, but I did mention how it's a Greek chart. I've heard Thy Mighty Contract last year. Loved it. I've heard several Rotting Christ releases for this chart, and I am not really impressed by any of them. There's one that I thought was great, but not as great as I wanted it to be, because Thy Mighty Contract is just so cool. And it's just so disappointing how a band really has only got one like amazing piece of work, one like really solid work, and the rest is just kind of negligible. But I'll get into that later, because next we're talking about a band that I wanted to get back to. This is Paysage d'Hiver's final demo, Das Tor. Now, there's something very different about this one. If you look at it, there's a part of this that isn't a gradient anymore. Every Paysage d'Hiver album cover has like a gradient of some sort, really fuzzy, nothing is quite black, and nothing is quite white. But Das Tor translates to the gate, and you look in the middle of this album cover, and you see the gate. It is unnatural, it is monolithic, you see there's even weird textures coming off of it. I'm looking at the thing right now, it's on this little Topsters chart here, and the sound matches it perfectly. You take Paysage d'Hiver's sound, and instead of doing it like self-titled, where it's like the most iconic way to portray the sound, here you've got the logical conclusion to the sound, starting with a 26-minute long track. It's not as drony as many Paysage d'Hiver tracks, it's nothing like Care, but it is monolithic and daunting and even a bit scary. As opposed to Noct, every track here is straight up black metal. Of course, with ambient tinges and doom tinges, but it never quite dives into those other genres for any certain amount of time. This whole thing is black metal, it's riffs, it's crazy. You'll have minimal moments like on Wintercult, where you'll have something kind of more acoustic sounding, but it doesn't last very long. This first track here is broken up into like 5 parts, and most of them are pounding or eerily serene, and it feels like The Gate. The album covers the album's Das Tor, which means the gate in German, I believe, and it sucks you in. It's got this immense gravitational pull. It's like the reality of life ripping you from this weird, isolated, like fantasy. It's like a warped fantasy because they're still suffering in it. It's weird. It's as lonely as any of the other projects. Well, maybe not Winter Cult, but it is 5 times as daunting as any of the other ones. It feels like a hostile piece of music, and not like Care Care, where it's like your own mind ripping you apart. It's like man versus God, or man versus like reality or existence. It feels so heavy, and it's got a decent variety between some more straightforward dark riffing styles akin to many other black metal bands, maybe some Norwegian stuff or some French stuff, and it kind of contrasts with this really iconic sound that was really given a lot of leeway on Winter Cult, of these huge, clashing, dramatic chord changes that I can't even really explain. I would need a little more theory knowledge, but it is just so sick how it'll be up here and it just crashes all the way down. And you got these really long, winding atmospheric passages, a good 16 bars before the riff even repeats. So cool. It's certainly not for everyone, and you have to be in the mood for it. And that's really interesting. As much as Paysage d'Hiver has like a very similar sound for all of their releases, except for the 2 ambient ones in the very last album they did, Geister, they all have like a different emotion, at least a little bit. You got Crystal and Issa, which is like daunting nature. You've got like Self-Titled, or some other ones that are like lonely, or Steinik, which feels like the power of nature. And Das Tor is just death. It's like all the other releases, you were in your little fantasy land, and now you're brought to the crushing reality that an unnatural world is going to be unnatural, and it's going to have a very unnatural seeming end. And it's so incredibly great. I would be lying to you if I said otherwise. It is a fantastic end to a big, long period, which would take 7 years for the band to do anything else. But who's really surprised? Up next, we have something equally as crushing for a bunch of different and seemingly wrong reasons. This is Have a Hedge with Combatantin Premaster. If there's any reason that Paul Ledney should just be sent to hell, it's because of this album. This feels like one of the most unholy and sickening things I've ever heard. Paul Ledney has a real talent for doing that. I don't know what it is, but like he is so good at making uncomfortable and really weird things. First of all, if you're going to get on my case and say this isn't real black metal, I'm not going to argue with you, because in a way, I kind of understand what you're saying. It is a drum, vocal, and minimal synth album. Not even like power electronics. It's not like an overwhelming barrage of force here. It's just Paul Ledney's crushing drumming style, which is very straightforward black metal, blast beats, swank beats, even D beats at some point, which I forget if that actually happens on this album in particular, but he does it during the new Profanatica. But you get this weird minimal synth, atonal brick of like real black metal energy. And there's, I think, some minimalist guitar in here, but I couldn't really tell you. The textures are just too weird. It's one of the coolest releases I've heard in a long time. It's really experimental and really ambitious. You mostly get some really minimalist noise generators, as well as some electronic bits here and there, and the drums are the heaviest thing here. They tie everything down, and having all that free space of reverb over the top gives us a really huge dynamic range. It's not like you're listening to it super loud and the song ends and you're like, wow, I was listening to that really loud, because you feel the whole come down. It's you feel how loud it is all the time. It's creepy. It sounds seriously messed up for how unobtrusive the sound is. Like, it's not power electronics. It's not a brick wall of noise. It's very minimal, and it doesn't even feel eerie. It feels wholly evil. It feels not too long, about 30 minutes and change, but it's very vivid. It feels sickeningly evil. It's like a big dark tunnel. It's like a fever dream. It's terrible, but it's also great. And this goes into a band called Welkin with Emblems of Valor, and this is a band that I looked forward to for a while because I heard a little bit off of my phone, and that's really misleading because then it sounds more raw than it is. This is like a 17-year-old, I think. It's some young person from Singapore who made a Three Kingdoms China concept album for black metal. That's one good thing, and the other good thing is that there are some good atmospheric moments here. There's some good riff variety between the more melodic and the more atmospheric stuff, at least there's that. And I want to commend the kid for being younger than me and making an album like this. I commend that a lot. But it suffers from poor mixing, really, really poor, overproduced, not raw sound at all, and it's very much to its deficit. Of course, there are some bands that make not raw black metal, and it sometimes works. Here, it just doesn't. It just kind of lets me down. None of the melodies really evoke any of this stuff. There's nothing folky to this whole thing. There's nothing symphonic. It doesn't really go in any direction that really matters. It is a black metal promotion black metal album in its truest form, where it's just riff salad, but it's not even the best riffs ever. There are honestly, some atmospheric moments of brilliance on this thing. Every once in a while, you'll hear a really, really good riff, but it's just lacking overall completely. It is pretty well written though. I was never truly bored. I do give it a good, but I'd like to replace this with another East Asian, specifically Chinese themed album. Well, not Chinese themed, just from China. The band Hoplites, or Hoplites if you're going with the Total War Rome 2 dialogue, or even maybe Rome 1 if I never played Rome 1. I just knew Rome 2. Here I'm talking about Total War again. There's a band called Hoplites, and we're not talking about that band because that's got metalcore in it, and that doesn't belong in Nothing But Black Metal November, unless it does. I make exceptions. But we're talking about a band called Vitriolic Sage, which is this dude's other project, which doesn't have any mathcore, doesn't have any BS. It's nothing but depression and riffs and a really cool album cover and samples of a woman crying the whole time, and it came out this year, and it sounds just phenomenal. There are so many good riffs on this thing. I couldn't even count them all if I tried. The songs are on the longer side, reaching like 8 to 10 minutes each, and they all sound great. Listen to it. It's one of my favorite black metal albums this year. And then we're going into Kostager by Arcanum. This is a band I am a little late to the party of listening to. There are a few bands like that, but what are you going to do? It's a band that's certainly on the atmospheric side just a little bit on the melodic side, certainly black metal, and it's from Sweden. If you like Over, and you want it just crustier, here you go. Over has always felt kind of clean and well done. Like it's never had like a clouded mixing style. Even Nottin's Madrigal, if that's how you pronounce the album, as raw as it is produced, it fits together very well. I love it so much because the tones are just perfect, but it is not mixed in the same room with the extra natural reverb that much. It is a very clear-cut album. This album, not so much. It's got the more raw production style, something you could akin to maybe post-hardcore, except it all fits in here really well. Arcanum is a one-man project, except for a couple of guest musicians on each of the albums here. This one has a female vocalist at one point. I don't have my favorite vocals on here. They're very goblin-esque, and they're very like wretched and weird, but it's got this very comfy and pastoral atmosphere to the whole thing, which this album cover does not feel comfy at all, but it's got this weird, slightly dark, hypnotic feeling to the whole thing. It's like an evil Droot. It's almost atmospheric black metal in a way, but I find it very enjoyable. It's a little folky and it's a little mystical. I mean, what's not there to like? It's relatively mid-paced, except when it wants to change up with some interesting dynamics. I'm gonna say before I give it a proper rating, I doubt this is the band's best project, but I still think it's pretty great. I could imagine it being in like a top 3. If it is the band's best project, I don't really think I need to hear the other albums. I think I'm good with just this one, but I think it's very solid. If you guys have any recommendations from this band, let me know. I know some people say this is like their favorite band. Up next is Tyrannus with Faust. So Tyrannus is from Poland, of all places, and you've got a really weird, super doomy blend of genres here. So if you like folk, goth rock, ambient, and a little bit of avant-garde music, and you blend it all up and smash it with a 50-50 mix of black metal, as well as some doom as well, dude, that is what you get on this album. And if that isn't enough, then I'll give you some more reasons, but like, come on, that sounds sick. Now, the version I found on YouTube is a bit compressed texture-wise. It feels like a bit too raw for my taste, but I'm sure if you found like a CD or a vinyl pressing of this, it would sound really good, because it was really like just almost there for me. It's just like a little bit more dynamics, and I would just be loving this thing. Everyone gives this some credit to sound like Catatonia, and they're right. It's like blackened Catatonia, but with all the death doomness here and the really interesting atmosphere and the progression being so bizarre, I gotta say, I've been talking about a lot of albums this year that aren't so different, but they have a subdued sense of being different. It's like they just branch into different writing styles, and bands like this are really inspiring to me. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. I sent it to my own band. That's how much I like it. And now for something a bit different, Shining's 3, or Angst, which is, if you guys don't know, this is a DSBM band, one of the kings of the genre, known for doing more progressive stuff, kind of like Bethlehem, but without the doom. And nowadays, they're kind of floundering around doing all sorts of who knows what with progressive metal and weird folky bits. It's like they tried to make Opeth even less serious than their mid-period, but, early Shining is crazy good. And this album is insanely good. It's weird because it doesn't feel like a huge weight on you, or there's not a lot of moaning here. It's very much a straightforward black metal album, but it feels, you can tell, it is fueled by some really negative emotions, the way it just surges forward the whole time. It's riffy, it's interesting, it's got some really interesting ideas, just like how the first track has this rather standard sounding blast beat tremolo combo, but it's got this really slow minimalist bass line under the whole thing, and it doesn't sound like it's being silly. It fits really well. I mean, it's all hitting on the beat as opposed to filling in some weird section there, but it really adds some really cool contrast, which just goes to show these simple little writing ideas that bands like Shining have. Sometimes that's just enough. It's got this really weird, washy atmosphere of these psychedelic blended tones, and the warping tempo of the whole thing just sounds insane, the way they're able to switch up on a dime like that. The track Submit to Self-Destruction is totally different. I believe it's the shortest track here, and it is just nothing but a straightforward black metal banger. It's nothing but blast beats, crunchy riffs, and heaviness. It's really, honestly, kind of a highlight because they just take normal black metal and just make it as good as it can be. The rest of the album is far more eccentric, far more interesting, but having a track like that I think is just necessary for black metal. Even Philosophem has Yesu Dod, which I know Yesu Dod isn't that normal for black metal, but for the sake of argument, it's the most normal track there. It's got a cool guy atmosphere. If you relate to pictures of Ryan Gosling too much, happy birthday Ryan Gosling, by the way, then you're probably gonna like this album a lot. It's got a cool guy, I don't care that I'm sad energy, but it's so deeply angry and apathetic under the whole thing. It's like you've been wronged in a really weird way. It's not like Leviathan where you're angry at existence, you're mad about living and you're just got this mystical nature of wanting to die. It's you're just apathetic about the whole thing. It's really interesting. I think it's great. Maybe the atmosphere is a little too weird for some people, but I think it's killer. Up next, we got Gojira's The Way of All Flesh. Just kidding. It's Mortify's The Way of All Flesh. It's some compilation. It's Greek, though. And it's one of the two Greek black metal trends here between eccentricity and liking death or heavy metal a bit too much. It's the latter. And you've got 2 demos and a live performance here. And the live performance sounds way better than the demos do. I say way better. It sounds a little better, but that's enough because the first 2 demos are covered in artifacts. Guys, it's not hard to not have artifacts. It's really not. You have to be standing on your microphone cable or punching your microphone or breaking something. You could cover your thing in vinyl crackle and tape hiss, and you could soak the thing in bleach for all I care. But artifacts, come on, let's be a little bit professional. And because I don't want to hear your super lame, really hollow sounding riffs with just a garbage tone, because that's kind of what this is. And just to hear every 5 seconds, it pisses me off. It's so hard trying to get into the atmosphere of something, and it's not like vinyl crackle where it's just for the whole time. It's just these little blips of annoying clicks. Just, I don't care if you're from the 90s, dude. Just have some pride, all right? Every band now knows how to incorporate noise and do it well. Don't be an idiot and just mix your thing properly and record it properly. Oh, it's too cold, I guess? You're too cold to record it a second time? Well, mistakes don't sound good. It makes your riffs sound bad. Not to mention these riffs are boring. So it's like caveman death metal, but it's also got black metal influenced riffs, which just means it's not heavy enough. Tracks like Gazing in a God's Dream do have some decent riffs to them, which makes tracks like those make me want to pull them out, make my own little demo, listen to that. But the artifacts are just too much. I think it's okay overall. I mean, I would have called it bad if it wasn't for that one track, really. And the rehearsal section, which sounds mostly fun. But why listen to that when you could listen to Rotting Christ's Non Serviam, which Of all their weird gothic wanderings where they like death metal too much, which is kind of like this thing right here, this one sounds the least hollow. It sounds the most interesting. Granted, I've learned this year that I'm not a fan of Rotting Christ. I like that debut album. Even some of their demos where they dip into death metal, it's just not that good. But this one's pretty solid. You know, it's a vaguely gothic, you know, and it's not too offensive to any degree. Maybe it's a little generic for some people, but if you want some good riffs, but this thing is by no means a banger, but it's also like not ambient. It's a weird middle zone of just like good riffs, and I'll take it. And next we're doing a re-listen of Darkthrone's Ablaze in the Northern Sky, an album that truly needs no introduction. Of all the albums that have ever had death metal clinging to the end of the whole thing, because this album's got groove to it, Ablaze in the Northern Sky does it better than anyone else. It's not like Non Serviam, where it's kind of lacking in groove. It's just that album's just kind of straightforward. It's not like Skeleton Witch, where it's just kind of meandering and like lacking in heaviness or anything like that. Instead, you got songs like In the Shadow of the Horns, which are banging. Catharian Life Code, come on, dude. That opening is so crazy, and then it just gets thrashy and insane. This album's really cool because it doesn't shy away from groove. You know, it's like a cleaner version of like Mutilation's demo or first album. It's raw, but it sounds awesome. There's also a part where Nocturno Culto's on the vocals, and he just shouts out a rapper tag. He's just like, Nocturno Culto, and then he starts roaring his vocals. I think it's kind of hilarious, in all honesty. Is it my favorite Darkthrone album? Probably not. I think Under a Funeral Moon is my favorite, but it is crazy. It's so good. Look at that album cover. Isn't this thing's freaking awesome? It's too good to ignore. It's seriously like one of the top 3 most important black metal albums ever, potentially top 5. I don't know. It's that good. In Second Wave, it is like maybe number 1. We wouldn't have Second Wave without it. It's interesting because it's Transylvanian Hunger has the Second Wave riffing style that Snore and Euronymous helped coin, but this album right here, it's Norwegian and it's got raw production and it's really buzzy guitar tone. It's clearly against death metal, and that's how it should be. It's sick. And next we got Streed's End of Life demo. This is one of the only times I've ever covered this on this channel. It's just one song and it's about 12 minutes long. It's from 1993, and according to Rate Your Music, it is the 3rd DSBM release ever. Bethlehem had something, one other band had something, and this was the 3rd official ever DSBM release. It's gloomy, it's weighty, it's got this really manic sounding sort of major scale riff going on here. It's also decently raw. It's a very effective release here, and if you listen to it today, it might not seem insane because it sounds like DSBM for sure, but the influence goes so deep, especially with the little poking out moments of that really brilliant lead guitar sound. It's very strong and has a strife-filled atmosphere of struggle and tragedy. It's a huge bummer of a track, and I think that's really awesome. It's not like as crushing as like Leviathan, but it's just a bummer, and it's kind of awesome. But yeah, it's great. Next we get a fusion album, Blackened Crust to be particular. This is Ritual Knife with Hate Invocation. This is a 26-minute long album. Most of these songs are 2 minutes or even less, except the last track, which is 5 minutes, and it is crusty and raw, and it kills. It's the freaking coolest thing I've ever heard. It's one of the angriest black metal albums I've ever heard. And you might be tired of crust in your music. You might think the riffs are a bit too derivative, but this thing is just straight up pissed. And dude, ATL Ho, this band's from Atlanta. I hope they go on tour, because I would literally see them. It's raw, it's brutal, it is hateful. The riffs feel like some sort of like proto DSBM stuff going on, but like really condensed. It is crusty, it's really heavy, and you got these really nice, super slow swank beats that add a lot of diversity to this album here. It kind of reminds you it's still punk influenced, even if it's the riffs and the production style is so raw. Every song is just a little bit different, but they're all equally evocative. A couple tracks like the closer of the album have some really sick riffing, feel a lot like some old Darkthrone stuff, which you're really not going wrong if you listen to this album. You know, you got 26 minutes. It's great. Go listen to it and just go punch a wall, because that's what it makes you want to do. Or like a cop or something. I don't know. Whatever you punks do. And next we're covering something that I'm sure some people have looked forward to. Rhinoceros's label,
RH07. Let's just say that. So RH07 is the 7th released from Rhinoceros, California, Long Beach based black metal label which is basically just Odds Manuk and one other band, and they just made a bunch of albums together. But they're awesome. Most of them are awesome. Last year I covered Nihilobstat, whatever it was. It had the horse on the cover with the white eyes. Really cool thing here. RH07, super interesting. And spoiler, if you like Leshy, the band from Russia, you're going to like RH07, except Leshy is more raw, less ambient stuff. RH07 has a lot of ambient tracks, both of which are under half-hour long demos, but this one has tons of really ghostly sounding clean vocals, or at least it shows up a few times. Kind of reminds me a bit of like Ustalost, where it's those like crystal mirror vocal styles of just layers of dripping, soaking wet vocals. But here, it's even more mystical. It's pushed more in the background. I mean, this album cover is just so bizarre looking. I wish I could say that properly evokes the feeling of the things here, but I don't even know what it evokes. This and Leshy and something I listened to very recently, Mutilation's Oath of the Black Blood, all have a very similar, a very eccentric style to them, where you just really struggle to pin down what the atmosphere is. That being said, it has atmosphere. It's weird, it's dark, it's mystical. But what's interesting about this thing, even though it's only 24 minutes long, it feels even shorter. It feels like a dream that passes by in and out really quickly. It's weird. It is utterly doom laden. It feels like there are these super slow gravity levels of heavy moments that just feel like your body's just folding to, like you're just disintegrating to this thing. It's got powerful and weird raw magical energies right in front of you. And of course, it's got riffs too, so that makes it great. It's also from Long Beach, so it's great. It's also raw, so it's great. It's from Rhinoceros, so it's great. Listen to it. And up next, we got a Greek album, Legion of Doom, Kingdom of Endless Darkness. Remember what I said about Death Void Terror feeling sickening? Now, you take that, and you forget that Death Void Terror made it, and instead you just do a dude who makes black metal that's really slow and sickening. Apparently this is NSBM. The first track, I believe, is called like A Death to David's Race or something like that, which would refer to Jewish people, I guess. But I'm assuming it's kind of like Silencer, where it just refers to like Abrahamic religions. Either way, it is utterly depraved and hopeless. What your mom thinks black metal is what this album is. If you like this one, then I'd recommend getting into some weird black noise stuff, black doom, Les Legions Noir, like weirdo albums. You know, you can get into some filthy stuff if you like this thing, because it is utterly unrelenting. There are 2 tracks on this album, being the second track, which is about 15 minutes in length, and one of the last tracks, which is about 8 minutes in length, which feel like the centerpieces of this album, which I love that idea of having an album that has like 2 tracks that are like the big ones, like the really long ones that you gotta focus on, that kind of tie the whole thing together. They are just these 2 megaliths of hate, utterly like upsetting material. It is filled with miasma and pestilence. It feels utterly hopeless and disgusting. You could put this up there with like Impaled Nazarene for levels of disgust, but it's far more like disturbing. It's like someone who has like so much self-hatred at the same time. It's like so filthy. It really is a kingdom of endless darkness. Give it a listen. It's great. It is so ugh. And you know, we're covering a recent release to end today's episode, as we're doing I think most of these or twice, 4 times, 6 times this chart. I don't remember. It doesn't really matter, because what really matters is this blackened war grind situation. It's Meth Christ's pestilential warfare of the black flame. So you know I worked out to this thing. But how did it go me working out? First of all, that snare, it's like a tin can. Sounds awesome. It's a great mix. It's occasionally groovy. It's a bit noisy, but it's certainly not over the top. It's pretty bouncy, and it's also decently angular, which is kind of how I like my death metal. But you know, there's enough black metal dissonant riffage to go around. There are almost too many pick slides on this thing. Seriously, every track has at least like 10. And I'm a guy that abuses pick slides. I think it's my way of putting black metal into my own band, which I think is like kind of funny. I'm sure my guitarist is pissed all the times I do pick slides. He's probably like, you're ruining your strings, but I don't really care. But here there's too many. It doesn't pull away too much though. It's like, it's kind of campy the way it's done like that. It's just like, haha, another one. The song Hate Commands is just based, it's driving, it's intense. It's a pretty simple album here. You know, it's not overly grindy, it's not overly filthy, but it's a bit noisy, it's aggressive, it's surging, it's deep, really dissonant too. A lot of really dissonant riffing here, and I think it sounds awesome, but I think it's great. And with all this depressing stuff, all this DSBM you're listening to, maybe you're listening to some Meth Christ, picking up the weights, getting big, kind of like me. I said kind of because I'm getting there. I'll get there. You should do that. You should lift weights right now. You should stop watching this and go lift weights, get big, eat some protein, go lift some weights. But yeah, that's the video. Hope you guys are enjoying this series so far. I certainly am. This beanie's accumulating oils onto my forehead. That'll be a problem my dermatologist has to solve. But that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed. I did. Hope to see you guys next time. Like and subscribe, please, and thank you. Any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel more than free, feel encouraged to put them in the comment section down below. Also down below, but a little bit higher than that, if you click the little show more button in the description box, you'll find my Instagram, my Twitter, and my Discord. My Discord, we're talking about black metal right now, and some dudes are posting Screamo still, which doesn't matter to me. It's nothing but Black Metal November, baby. We can't even be talking about that. But other than that, that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day.